The flames were the first thing the ground crews saw, an orange, violent bloom tearing across the sky like a piece of the sun breaking loose. The B-24 should have been falling, breaking apart, or spinning into the plains below. Instead, impossibly, unbelievably, it kept flying. Its silhouette trembled through the smoke, wings wobbling as if struggling to remember what flight felt like. In that moment, everyone watching understood that whatever was happening inside that aircraft was no accident, no routine malfunction. It was a decision, a human decision, carved out of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of fear only those who fly into war can truly comprehend. Because that burning bomber had a choice, it could have landed safely. But the men inside chose a different fate. And the world would never forget it. It began before dawn, when the shadows were still long on the ground and the cold bit through uniforms like needles. Captain Daniel Mercer, the aircraft commander, had barely slept in days. Not from fear, but from responsibility. He carried the faces of his crew in his mind like a weight, young men with dreams that stretched far beyond the metal walls of a bomber. They laughed, they cursed, they teased him, but they trusted him with the most fragile thing humans have, their lives. Standing beside his aircraft in the dim blue light, he placed a hand on its cold fuselage, feeling the frost melt beneath his palm. His bomber wasn't glamorous. It wasn't sleek. But it had carried them home more times than he could count, and it was part of their family now, scarred, worn, and loyal. Their mission that morning was direct but deadly: destroy a heavily fortified fuel depot supporting enemy armor. Intelligence insisted the depot was transforming into the nerve center of the enemy's next offensive, an offensive that could cost thousands of Allied lives. Every crew knew what failure meant. But Daniel didn't talk about danger with his men. He talked about purpose. Not in speeches, not in grand words, but in the quiet confidence of a man who believed in what he was doing, even when it terrified him. The engines roared to life as the sun broke through the horizon. The aircraft shuddered against the runway like a restless beast, and when Daniel pulled the throttle forward, the bomber leapt into the morning sky. Clouds swallowed them whole as they climbed, and for a few brief moments the world disappeared, leaving only the drone of engines and the cold, blinding white around them. Inside the aircraft, each man settled into his post. They had done this countless times. Routine mixed with tension, familiarity with dread. Yet beneath it all was something unspoken, an acknowledgement that every mission could be their last. 2 hours into the flight, just before reaching enemy airspace, the attack hit them with brutal precision. A sudden impact ripped through the bomber like a punch from a giant. The right wing erupted in flames, and the aircraft lurched violently. Men slammed into bulkheads, equipment rattled loose, and oxygen masks bounced wildly against steel. Smoke filled the narrow passageways like a living thing, choking the air and stinging their eyes. The fire wasn't spreading, it was devouring. Daniel steadied the bomber with both hands, fighting the shuddering metal beast that wanted to roll, dive, or break apart. The fire warning lights screamed. Fuel lines ruptured. Instruments flickered. The radio crackled. But in the middle of the chaos, Daniel's thoughts weren't on himself. They were on the men depending on him. He forced the bomber level, knowing full well that every second counted. His crew scrambled, trying to contain the fire. They knew the worst truth of all: a bomber burning in midair was a death clock. Minutes. Maybe less. The crew reported what Daniel already feared: the flames had reached the oxygen tanks. The next explosion could tear the wing clean off. Under normal conditions, the nearest emergency landing field was close enough to reach. They could have glided there even with one engine dead. They could have. But normal conditions were behind them now. Below, just ahead of their flight path, the enemy fuel depot stretched across the ground like a steel beast, massive, fortified, and critical. If left untouched, thousands of soldiers on their own side would pay the price. In that moment, none of them spoke of turning back. They didn't need to. They all felt the gravity of what they were facing. Land safely, or complete the mission knowing it meant their lives. There are decisions that break a man. There are decisions that define him. And then there are decisions that transcend everything human, becoming legend. Daniel's jaw trembled, not from fear, but from resolve, as he pushed the bomber forward. The burning wing crackled like a torch. Smoke filled the cockpit until he could barely see the controls. The heat was unbearable. Sweat stung his eyes even as the oxygen mask dug into his face. The aircraft no longer felt like a machine. It was a dying creature giving its last strength to its crew. They descended toward the target. Alarms screamed. Flames trailed behind them like a comet streaking toward Earth. The enemy below scrambled, unsure whether the burning bomber was crashing or attacking. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, but the bomber was already too damaged to dodge. Shells burst around them. Shrapnel ripped through the fuselage. But the B-24 kept flying, its engines roaring with a stubborn will, as if it refused to quit until its mission was done. Inside, every man thought of home. Of mothers waiting for letters. Of fathers pretending not to worry. Of girls whose photographs stayed tucked in breast pockets. Of futures they longed for but would never see. Yet not one of them reached for a parachute. Not one called for escape. Their lives were already pledged. When they finally cleared the last ridge, the fuel depot came into full view, an enormous sprawl of tanks, pipelines, and armored vehicles. Daniel gripped the controls tighter, guiding the burning bomber downward. The flames had spread so far that the right wing looked ready to melt. The bomber was seconds away from breaking apart. They all knew it. Still, they kept going. The ground crews at the enemy base realized too late what was happening. The burning bomber wasn't crashing. It was aiming. Every engine screamed in agony. Every bolt trembled. Every man inside held his breath. And then, with the last force of its dying wings, the B-24 plunged directly into the heart of the depot. The explosion was unlike anything witnesses had ever seen. A monstrous fireball tore into the sky, consuming steel, fuel, and concrete in an inferno that shook the ground. The shockwave shattered windows miles away. Flames spiraled upward as if reaching for the heavens. And in that moment, the enemy advance, planned for weeks, collapsed into ash. When the smoke cleared hours later, all that remained of the bomber was twisted metal and a crater so wide it seemed impossible that only one aircraft had caused it. But those who saw the burning bomber's final flight would tell the story for decades. They would speak of the men who had the chance to survive but instead chose to protect thousands they would never meet. They would speak of courage that defied instinct, fear, and even fate. And long after the war ended, long after the world moved on, the memory of that burning B-24 would remain a symbol of sacrifice so profound that even time couldn't erode it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to support the channel. Your engagement helps us keep these heroic memories alive for the world. Special request: before you go, share in the comments which moment in this story moved you the most, and why.